"We thought a condo would be more suitable for you," my dad's fiancée said after plotting to sell my lake house. At their engagement party, I pulled out the trust. I never thought I'd have to fight my own father for what was rightfully mine. But when I discovered he and his new wife were secretly trying to transfer my lake house behind my back, I realized sometimes the people closest to you can become the greatest threats to your future. My name is Maria, I'm 29, and until 6 months ago I believed family meant unconditional love and support. Now I know better. Family can sometimes mean calculating every move, documenting every conversation, and preparing for betrayal from the people who should protect you most. My grandmother Deborah was the cornerstone of our family, strong-willed, perceptive, and fiercely protective of those she loved. The lake house had been in our family for 3 generations, a charming 2-story cabin nestled among towering pines with a private dock extending into crystal-clear waters. This wasn't just any property, it was where I spent every summer growing up, where Grandma Deborah taught me to fish, to swim, to build a proper campfire. It was where she shared her wisdom about life while we watched the sunset paint the water in strokes of orange and pink. "Remember, Maria," she'd say, her weathered hands wrapped around a mug of tea, "material things come and go, but a place that holds your memories is priceless." When Grandma was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, the prognosis was grim, 6 months, maybe less. She handled the news with the same grace and pragmatism that defined her life. While everyone around her crumbled, she remained our rock. During those final months, I noticed something change in her interactions with my father. There was a new guardedness in her eyes when he visited, especially after he started bringing his new girlfriend Sophia around. At 38, Sophia was 20 years my father's junior and seemed to appear suspiciously soon after my mother's death 2 years prior. I first met Sophia at a family dinner my father hosted to introduce her properly. She was striking tall with perfect hair and a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. Throughout dinner, I noticed how her gaze lingered on the artwork in my father's home, how she casually asked about family heirlooms. "This grandfather clock must be worth a fortune," she'd mused, running her fingers along the antique wood. "It's been in the family for generations, hasn't it?" What struck me most was how quickly my father transformed in her presence. Dad had always been sensible, frugal even. Yet suddenly he was taking lavish vacations, buying expensive gifts, renovating his house to Sophia's specifications. It was as if he was desperate to prove his worth to her. Grandma noticed too. During one of our private moments at the hospital, she squeezed my hand tightly. "I've seen women like her before," she whispered, her voice weaker but her eyes sharp as ever. "They have a talent for finding vulnerable men with assets." 2 weeks before she passed, Grandma asked to speak with me alone. The nurses had warned us she was fading quickly. I rushed to the hospital to find her surprisingly alert, almost energized by some internal purpose. "Maria, I need you to listen carefully," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've made arrangements about the lake house. It's important you know." Before she could finish, a nurse entered to check her vitals and the moment passed. Grandma drifted to sleep, and when she woke again, she seemed confused, unable to continue our conversation. 3 days later, she slipped away peacefully in her sleep. The weeks after Grandma's funeral passed in a blur of grief and paperwork. Dad and Sophia announced their engagement just 1 month later, a move that shocked even our most distant relatives for its impropriety. I kept my distance, focusing instead on my job as an architectural engineer and the process of grieving my grandmother. Then came the call that changed everything. "Maria Rhodes," the voice on the other end was professional, unfamiliar. "This is Margaret Winters from Blackwell and Associates law firm. I'm calling regarding your grandmother Deborah Rhodes' estate. There's a matter that requires your attention as soon as possible." The next morning, I sat across from Ms. Winters, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She slid a folder across her desk. "Your grandmother came to see me approximately 3 months before her passing," she explained. "She was concerned about certain developments in your family situation." Inside the folder was a copy of a transfer request for the lake house property, a request initiated by my father to add Sophia's name to the deed. My stomach dropped. There was also a sticky note attached to the document with my father's handwriting: start process to transfer fully to S after wedding. I don't understand, I said, my voice hollow. How could he do this? The lake house was supposed to come to me. Ms. Winters removed her glasses. Your grandmother anticipated something like this might happen, that's why she came to me. She handed me another document, a trust agreement dated 6 weeks before Grandma's death. The language was complex, but the intent was crystal clear. The lake house had been placed in an irrevocable trust with me as the sole beneficiary. My grandmother had already transferred the property before her death. Your grandmother was quite explicit about her wishes, Ms. Winters continued. She wanted to ensure that the property remained in your possession regardless of any attempts to redirect it. I felt a strange mixture of vindication and betrayal wash over me. Grandma had protected me, but the fact that she needed to protect me from my own father was devastating. There's more, Ms. Winters said, her expression grave. Your grandmother hired a private investigator to look into Sophia's background. The findings are concerning. The report revealed that Sophia had been married twice before, both times to wealthy older men. Her first marriage ended when her husband lost his fortune in bad investments. The second ended with a contentious divorce after the husband's children discovered she had been systematically liquidating assets. There were also records of 2 property transfers similar to what she and my father were attempting with the lake house. This wasn't just opportunism, this was a pattern. That night, I barely slept. The betrayal cut deep, not just Sophia's calculated deception but my father's willingness to steal my inheritance. The lake house wasn't just a valuable property, it was the physical embodiment of my connection to Grandma, to our family history. Over the next week, I worked closely with Ms. Winters to understand exactly where things stood. The trust was ironclad. There was no legal way for my father or Sophia to touch the property, however, they didn't know that yet. Their transfer request had been flagged by the county clerk's office because of the trust, which is how Ms. Winters had been notified, but no rejection had been processed. We could simply inform them that the property is in trust, Ms. Winters suggested. That would be the straightforward approach. But something in me had hardened. The straightforward approach wouldn't expose their intentions to the family. It wouldn't make my father recognize what he'd done. Most importantly, it wouldn't reveal Sophia for who she truly was. No, I said firmly, I want to confront them myself. I want to see their faces when they realize what they've done. Ms. Winters nodded, a glint of approval in her eyes. Your grandmother would have done the same. Together, we devised a strategy. First, I would gather more information about their plans for the property. Second, I would document everything meticulously. Third, I would confront them publicly at the upcoming family dinner celebrating their engagement, an event I had previously planned to skip. Over the next 2 weeks, I played the role of the unsuspecting daughter. I visited my father's house, making sure to express interest in Sophia's plans for updating the family properties. The information flowed freely. They had no reason to be guarded around me since they assumed I knew nothing. The lake house has so much potential, Sophia gushed during one visit. Those views could command a premium if it were properly developed. A friend of mine in real estate thinks the land alone could sell for a fortune to developers. My father nodded along enthusiastically. Sophia has such vision for these things. She's already found a buyer interested in the property after we finish the transfer. A buyer? I asked, maintaining my composure despite the rage boiling inside me. You're planning to sell Grandma's lake house. My father at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. Well, it's just sitting empty, Maria. It makes more financial sense to liquidate the asset. Sophia has connections that can get us well above market value. I see, I said, mentally recording every word. And what about Grandma's wish for me to have the lake house? She always said it would come to me. Sophia jumped in smoothly, placing her hand on my father's arm. Your father and I have discussed that, sweetie. We thought we could set aside a small portion of the proceeds for you, perhaps enough for a down payment on a condo. Wouldn't that be nice? Something more suitable for a young professional like yourself. Their condescension fueled my determination. Each conversation revealed more of their plans. They intended to sell to a developer who would tear down the historic cabin and build luxury vacation homes. The proceeds would fund their early retirement to a beachfront property Sophia had already selected. None of it involved me or honored Grandma's legacy. The final piece fell into place when I accidentally discovered printouts of bank statements in my father's office while Sophia was showing me renovation samples. The statements revealed significant financial troubles. My father had been making risky investments at Sophia's urging, depleting his retirement accounts. They weren't just being greedy, they were desperate. My father and Sophia's engagement dinner was held at an upscale restaurant overlooking the city. Family members from both sides attended, along with a few close friends. I arrived early, professionally dressed with a leather portfolio tucked under my arm. My father raised an eyebrow at my formal attire but seemed pleased I had made an effort. "You look nice, Maria," he said, kissing my cheek. "I'm glad you could make it." Sophia swept over in a designer dress, embracing me with the artificial warmth she had perfected. "Maria, we weren't sure you'd come. You've been so busy lately." "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, returning her smile with equal insincerity. "After all, family is everything, isn't it?" Throughout the appetizers and main course, I observed their interactions with the family. Sophia charmed everyone, especially my father's older relatives who seemed enamored with her attentiveness. My father beamed with pride, clearly believing he had secured a prize. As dessert was being served, my father clinked his glass for a toast. He spoke about new beginnings, about how Sophia had brought light back into his life after my mother's passing. I waited patiently, sipping my water, letting him finish his performance. When the applause died down, I stood up. "I'd like to say something too," I announced, my voice steady despite my racing heart. All eyes turned to me. My father nodded encouragingly, probably expecting some conciliatory words after weeks of my obvious discomfort with their relationship. "First, congratulations on your engagement," I began, forcing a smile. "It's certainly been illuminating to watch your relationship develop so quickly." I opened my portfolio and removed the first document, the property transfer request with my father's note about transferring full ownership to Sophia. "Dad, perhaps you could explain to everyone why you're attempting to transfer Grandma's lake house to Sophia, the same lake house that Grandma explicitly wanted me to have." The room fell silent, my father's face drained of color. "Maria, this isn't the time or place," he started. "Actually, I think this is exactly the right time and place," I cut in, "because I've discovered it's not just about transferring the property. You're planning to sell it to developers who will destroy it completely." Sophia's practiced smile remained fixed, though her eyes had hardened to flint. "Maria, there seems to be a misunderstanding. Your father and I were simply discussing options." "No misunderstanding," I interrupted, pulling out another document, printouts of text messages between Sophia and a real estate developer, obtained by the private investigator Grandma had hired. "You've already agreed to a sale price of $1.8 million, contingent on you securing full ownership. You even discussed how to avoid capital gains tax by claiming it as your primary residence after marriage." Murmurs rippled through the gathering. My Uncle Robert, my father's brother, leaned forward with a frown. "Charles, is this true?" he demanded. My father looked trapped. "It's more complicated than Maria is making it sound. The property requires expensive upkeep and Maria has her career in the city. She has no time for maintaining it." "That's my decision to make," I replied coldly. But fortunately, Grandma saw this coming. With deliberate slowness, I removed the trust document from my portfolio and slid it across the table to my father. Grandma created an irrevocable trust 3 months before she died. The lake house was transferred to that trust with me as the sole beneficiary. Your request to transfer the property was flagged because you no longer have any legal right to it. It hasn't been yours to sell for months." The silence that followed was absolute. My father stared at the document, his hands shaking slightly as he processed what this meant. Sophia's mask finally slipped, her expression contorting with fury before she could compose herself. "This can't be legal," she snapped. "Deborah was sick, not in her right mind. Grandma was perfectly lucid and the trust was properly executed with multiple witnesses," I countered. "But I'm not finished. There's still the matter of why Grandma felt she needed to protect her property from her own son." I distributed copies of the private investigator's report on Sophia, heavily redacted to include only the most relevant information about her past marriages and financial manipulations. Sophia Hamilton, formerly Sophia Crane, formerly Sophia Di Laurentiis, I announced. Twice married to wealthy older men, twice departed with significant assets after short marriages. The stunned expressions around the table gave me no pleasure, but I continued, determined to finish what I'd started. Dad, I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because Grandma protected me and now I'm protecting you. Sophia isn't marrying you for love. She's targeting your assets, assets that are rapidly diminishing because of the investments she's encouraged you to make. Sophia stood up so abruptly her chair toppled backward. These are outrageous accusations. Charles, are you going to let her talk to me this way? My father looked utterly lost, his eyes moving from the trust document to Sophia to me. For a moment, I glimpsed the father I remembered, thoughtful, cautious, loving, emerging from whatever fog Sophia had cast over him. Is it true, he asked her quietly, about your previous marriages? Her hesitation was answer enough. You said you'd only been married once to your college sweetheart, he continued, his voice hollow. You said it ended because you grew apart. Sophia's expression hardened as she realized the game was over. This is ridiculous. I don't have to sit here and be insulted by your ungrateful daughter. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, leaving my father staring after her in shock. The weeks following the confrontation were difficult. My father initially retreated into angry silence, humiliated and defensive. Sophia disappeared from his life as quickly as she had entered it, though not before attempting to secure a parting gift for her emotional distress. I maintained my distance, allowing the reality of what had happened to sink in. I focused on the lake house, visiting it for the first time since Grandma's death. The property had been neglected, dust covered the furniture, the dock needed repairs, the garden was overgrown. I spent weekends there cleaning, fixing, replanting. Each task felt like reconnecting with Grandma, honoring her foresight and love. 3 weeks after the confrontation, my father appeared at my apartment door. He looked older, diminished, his confidence eroded by betrayal and shame. Can we talk? He asked simply. We sat at my kitchen table, the space between us filled with unspoken words. Finally, he spoke. I've been a fool, he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. After your mother died, I was lost. Sophia made me feel young again, important. I wanted to believe she loved me for me. She targeted you because you were vulnerable, I said, not unkindly. It's a pattern she's perfected. That doesn't excuse what I did, trying to take your inheritance, betraying your grandmother's wishes. I convinced myself it was the practical solution, that you didn't need the lake house like Sophia and I needed the money. He shook his head. I don't expect you to forgive me, Maria, but I want you to know I'm sorry, truly sorry. The apology felt insufficient against the magnitude of his betrayal, but it was a start. We agreed to begin the slow work of rebuilding trust between us, though I made it clear that reconciliation would take time and consistent effort on his part. As for the lake house, I threw myself into its restoration. I hired local craftsmen to repair the dock and update the cabin's aging systems while preserving its historic character. I planted new saplings along the shoreline where older trees had fallen in recent storms. With each improvement, the property felt more mine, not just legally but spiritually. In the process, I discovered hidden aspects of my grandmother I'd never known. A loose floorboard in her bedroom concealed a box of letters exchanged between her and my grandfather during World War II. The gardening shed contained meticulous journals documenting decades of observations about local wildlife. These treasures would have been lost forever if the property had been sold and demolished as Sophia had planned. 6 months after our confrontation, I invited my father to the lake house. It was a crisp autumn day, the trees ablaze with color reflected perfectly in the still water. Grandma was right about this place, I told him as we stood on the newly rebuilt dock. It's not just property, it's our history. Your grandmother was right about a lot of things, he acknowledged quietly. Especially Sophia. He hesitated, then added, she left me with substantial debt, the investments she pushed me into, they weren't sound. I'm having to downsize, start over at 58. I nodded, unsurprised but sympathetic. Grandma would say it's never too late for a fresh start. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in the familiar oranges and pinks of my childhood memories, I felt Grandma's presence all around us. She had protected this place not just for me, but for our family's future, for the stories and traditions that would continue here long after we were gone. Thank you for inviting me here, my father said, genuine gratitude in his voice. I don't deserve it. No, you don't, I agreed. But Grandma would want us to try to heal. This place was always about family for her, the real meaning of family, love, protection, forgiveness when it's earned. We stood in silence then, watching darkness settle over the lake. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but like the lake house itself, what was broken could be rebuilt, different perhaps, but solid once more. My grandmother had safeguarded my inheritance, but her greater gift had been showing me how to protect what truly matters, not just property but principles, not just assets but legacy. In her final act of love, she had taught me the most important lesson of all, that sometimes you have to fight for what's yours, not out of greed, but out of respect for those who loved you enough to provide for your future.